Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today is August 22nd, 2024. This is the Daily AI Show, and you're watching and listening to us, hopefully live, if not on replay. And today we are talking about the Pareto problem and what that is, if you don't know what it is, how it applies to AI, and a whole bunch of other really interesting things to talk about, because this is a fun conversation where it branches off and then it just gets into some really fun areas and stuff like that. So with us today, we have Jimmy, Beth, Andy, and I'm Brian. And I think just to get us started here, I actually want to read the LinkedIn post from Ethan Mollick, our buddy, on what the Pareto, what he said, and then what kicked off this conversation, because we draw inspiration from a lot of places. Ethan Mollick's definitely one of them. We all are fans of what he's writing. And so this is what he said. When an expert says, quote, an AI can do 80% of the work, unquote, on a project, that is not usually a Pareto problem, in parentheses, leaving the hardest 20% to humans. It usually means AI does a lot of the annoying work, and my expertise allows me to spot any errors, fill in the extra gaps, and add insights. So that's what Ethan said, and that kind of kicked off this idea of like, oh, that's sort of interesting. Now, in this show, we are definitely going to get into the comments, because there are some really good comments underneath Ethan's. There's 88 comments on this particular post. By the way, this is from like 2 weeks ago at this point, but you can go back and look at Ethan Mollick's LinkedIn post feed, and you'll find this probably 10 posts back, something like that. He posts pretty frequently, maybe a little bit more than that. But I want to get into those. But before we do that, we really should level set and just make sure we understand what the Pareto problem is. I'll be the first to say, like, I had heard of it. I've definitely heard of the 80-20 rule. Could I have quoted this? No. Am I going to use perplexity in the next 30 seconds? Yes, I am. So the Pareto problem is also known as the 80-20 rule, which is what I would more know it by. It's a concept that suggests that the unequal relationship between inputs and outputs. It states that roughly 80% of effects come from 20% of the causes. Now, a couple things here. This is not a mathematical law. This is just, it's an observation. It's something that a gentleman with the last name Pareto, an Italian gentleman, came up with a long time ago after noticing, I think, like that his 80% of his turnip crops were yielding, or 20% were yielding 80% of the results, right? And then he started thinking about how that applies to other places. So where could we apply this? We could say in business, 80% of the company's profits might come from 20% of its customers. We might say 20% of our work effort might produce 80% of the results. You could say 20% of the workforce at a particular company are the real true experts, or let's say sales. 20% of my sales reps produce 80% of my revenue in, let's say, outbound, if we got really specific there. Does that mean the rest of the reps in that 80% are not needed? No, of course not. But we can see how this 80-20 rule definitely applies as a concept. It's not a mathematical formula. It's not a hard and fast, but lots of people do like to apply it. Now, I do want to point this out, and this came from a YouTube video that was used as a reference on it. And let me just make sure I'm giving credit where credit's due. Give me 1 second. Oh, you know what? Well, it's called the Pareto Principle, and unfortunately, I can't see who I'll look. I'll find out who.
It's from Sprouts.
Sprouts, thank you. Yeah. Mentioned in that video that even Pareto himself cautioned against focusing too much on this 80-20 concept, because as humans, if we want something to fit, God knows we will find a way to make it fit. And that actually becomes a fallacy, or definitely a bias. Whereas we start to apply this to places where maybe it doesn't fit as well. And he had sort of a cool, or at least the YouTube video talked about how his response was basically like, if you, in its absence, if you remove it, we will most likely replace it with another principle. So that's the level set, right? The 80-20 rule. We've all heard this. We've all seen this. We've probably observed this in our own life, whether it's your kids, and looking at my daughter at 13 and going like, yeah, I think sometimes 20% of her efforts really are 80% of the results, As a dad, sometimes I'd like to see a little higher than 20%, but so I think it applies a lot of areas. But we're here to talk about AI because, and this is where the conversation really starts with everybody on the show, a lot of what we're seeing with AI are efficiency gains. So it's pretty easy to say, oh, well, back to Ethan's initial comment. Hey, if AI can do 80% of the work, that means that doesn't mean the hardest part of that is left to humans. And so there's some really good comments, which I don't want to monopolize this whole first bit here. I want to have a conversation, but I think it does really open up the conversation of like, okay, where is AI becoming the most valuable? And what does it mean if it is able to take over 80% of the work, of the repetitive, boring, redundant tasks that have to be done? And if it can do that, and of course, every industry and business and subject is different, what does that mean for humans and what they can do and unlock with their 20%? And so it's just a fun conversation. So there you go. There's my start to it. Thanks for sticking with me for just sort of an intro here, but I wanted to kind of set the conversation. But who would like to pick it up from here?
I'll take it. I've got a couple of thoughts. So number one, I think Ethan Mollick really points out what a lot of people are saying about AI when you're implementing AI. It's 80% of all of those mundane tasks, like you said. I think what this allows us to do is not have the humans doing the 20% of the hardest lift. What it enables humans to do is do cognitive offload, right? So they don't have to worry about the mundane. They can concentrate on, did anything fall through the cracks? Does this highlight something important that I should pay attention to? I can spend my time now working on the more creative sides of solutions, and I can be more innovative and spend time doing those kinds of tasks and things that will eventually build out whether my business or my field or my knowledge or anything like that, because AI can take care of the day-to-day. And I think that's the biggest draw from that. And the Pareto Principle to me is pretty much, when we see it applied within AI or within business, it really is a prioritization model, right? It's like, oh, okay, we can kind of see that this is the most important, so let's spend a little more time on this. So if more directly in the AI space, that's usually in efficiency gains, right? So that's applying various model efficiencies like compression or and those kinds of things where you can get more out of your model than simply throwing more parameters at it, right? And I believe there's things like LoRa's and things like that allow you to make that far more efficient. And even Sakana's evolution model merge is sort of along those lines, where you take all the pieces of or the best results or pieces from various models and you form a new model that's more efficient and tends to be just as good or sometimes better at those things, and they're all put together. So I think that's where we'll gain the most out of this 80-20, but just realize that it's not it's not an offload to the human, it's the human offloading to the AI.
Right.
That's a good way to put it. Sorry, go ahead. That's awesome. That's a good way to put it.
I also think that there's a piece, particularly with AI, that we're missing. And so I am going to call this the Pareto together principle, because it's not, the sum doesn't actually add up to 100. It adds up to more than 100, right? Because there are certain tasks where you're going to overlap. Not just human oversee, which could then be pulled into that human part, but where the human and the AI are literally working together in order to expand what's possible and what's capable. So while it adds up to more than 100, it's also, that is, I guess, the quantification of it's more than the sum of its parts, right? When we pull this together, we can do more than the two of us could do individually. And of course, I'm just looking at AI in that equation as a single, and there's no reason it's a single, right? All of us together, me with all of my AI buddies, systems, but yeah, can do more than I can do alone, or an AI automation that is not working directly with me can do alone. What? Yeah, Andy, does that? I see you nodding.
Yes, I want to add another frame to this, which is if you think of the 80-20 rule, it's really a plot of value increasing on the y-axis with effort expended on the x-axis. So as time goes forward, or as you could do it just on the basis of time, 20% of the time passing in your levels of effort, gets you 80% of the way there. But then there's this thing called diminishing returns, which is what causes you to have to spend 80% of your time to get that remaining 20% of benefit. So that's the idea. And so I'm going to say, in the context of AI, there are a couple ways this can be applied. One is, I think it may be the case that AI can actually get more than 80% of what's done in far less than 20% of the effort. So it's throwing a monkey wrench into what is normally a set of constraints that create diminishing returns for us when we try to work with our limited capabilities. Now you add AI to it, and suddenly the Pareto curve is changed, because it's no longer the 80-20 rule. It's the 95-5 rule, because AI can do 95% of the work in 5% of the time that you used to take to do 100% of the time. Okay, so that's the diminishing returns thing. But now let's think about it in terms not of a linear application of effort, but rather identifying the 20% of inputs that actually deliver the greatest result. So this is a question of, like, take for example, identifying the best customers that you have. You shouldn't spend all your time on the long tail, because the long tail that has this diminishing returns means that these are the customers at the tail end of your distribution of productivity, let's say, like how much do they buy from you, that if you can spend 80% of your time trying to, get results from that long tail without automation, and that's a waste of your time compared to cultivating more examples of the best customers who are among your 20% of customers, and AI can help you identify those. So AI can solve a lot of the inefficiencies that are just natural and are expressed in the Pareto principle. It can solve those by dramatically accelerating our ability to identify the 20% of inputs that are more valuable than the other 80%. And it can also, I think, dramatically remove the burden of this progressive level of effort curve that we see when we're not being assisted by machine intelligence.
And I just want to pick up on the time constraint part of it. Not that we haven't had computers that could run when people are sleeping, but when you think about effort, in human effort, you do have to at least factor in, the constraints of being awake versus being asleep. And yes, there's bro culture, and there's the companies, the early days of Facebook that, talked about 70-hour work weeks and just work and work and work, whatever. Okay. So they exist, of course. And what are the diminishing returns of people being really tired? How many errors are showing up because people are tired? There's reasons why truck drivers and pilots have limits on how long they can drive, or because the other side of that is serious, death or destruction or otherwise, because they have serious jobs. They can really hurt not only themselves but other people. So we see this all across the board. My dad was in aviation. He was overseeing aircraft-based maintenance. There's shift work. There's people coming in and coming off. It's very serious work. Overhauling a plane, you can imagine there's not a whole lot of time to be wrong, right? If for what they're trying to do and rebuild and recondition a plane to go out and serve, literally thousands and thousands of people. So there's tons of jobs like that. But when you get to AI, not that it's going to refurbish a plane and get it back out the door. However, now we're looking at times where it's not even just a singular AI working on a problem, but very soon, we know through agents and stuff like that, it will be multiple or perhaps thousands of AI agents all collectively working on a problem while we're also working. So it's not like, I think I like what your point, Andy, is, because when I think about it being on a graph, it's like, well, how would you even graph that? Because it's exponential based off of where we are today, which is to say, yes, it's doing 80% of the work, but it's, to your point, it's doing it 5, 3, 1% of the time and probably at a higher level for certain tasks. But this is a good pivot to talk about expertise, human expertise. And there's a couple points, or just want to give credit where credit is due on this one. So on Ethan Mollick's post, there was a couple of comments that got a lot of support. They just got, like likes and stuff like that. The first one is from Michael J. Goldrich. And this is what he has to say. And I thought it was a good analogy. When we say AI does 80% of the work, we're assuming work is just, work. But in reality, projects aren't assembly lines where we can neatly divide tasks. Instead, think of it like cooking. AI might be great at chopping vegetables, measuring ingredients, and even following recipes. That can easily look like 80% of the work if you're counting steps or time spent. But ask any chef, the magic isn't in the prep. It's knowing when to trust your instincts and go off recipe. It's that pinch of salt added at just the right moment, or the creative fusion of flavors that creates something entirely new. So maybe instead of percentages, we should be asking, how does AI enhance our ability to create? How does it free us up to take bigger risks, to innovate in ways we couldn't before? The real value isn't in AI doing 80% of the work. It's how it might allow us to reimagine the other 20% and perhaps the entire project itself. I love that comment. I think that's well thought out. Kudos, Michael, on your analogy and reasoning there. But I think that really brings in this idea of, what does it allow humans to do? And hopefully what it does is it unchains us and allows us to be more human and lean into the things that make us truly great. And I will just say, as a side note here, I had an amazing conversation with a CEO last night. And throughout that entire conversation, the main thing I was thinking is, wow, this person's as they should be, is really an expert in their field. There was just no lack of expertise. We were talking about how we could use AI to make that CEO's certain tasks better, but we would be doing it with their expertise. That's key. And so there's another comment in here as well that sort of talks to that point. It says it's a huge lever for experts, but you have to know what you're doing. Excuse me. It's easy to understand if we think of LLMs as cultural technology, and an interaction between a senior developer and a junior developer will result in high quality code, whereas an interaction between a non-coder and a junior coder will result in something that may not work. This is consistent with what is in the training data. So this is Rajesh Goli, but I love what he's saying about the idea of the experts. You do have to know what you're doing, and AI is going to support experts in a new way, I believe. Because it's gonna allow experts to be experts, so that it can take on that 80%. I don't know, what's your guys' thought on that? Anyway, I thought both of those were really, really intelligent comments. I love them.
Yes, that's one of the examples, or that's one of the things that's been seen as AI is studied when humans and AIs interact. That AI serves as an enhancer for the skills and the expertise that people have as like domain experts and that kind of thing, which again, like you were talking about, Andy, that it's not linear, right? And Brian was sort of saying that too. Yeah, our simple like 2D pretty bell curve graphics are no longer sufficient, because we're talking about multiple dimensions now, right? We're at least talking about 3D, and AI can conceive of much higher Ds than we can. So that number may shift a little bit. Yeah. So I definitely think that what this is, that what we're looking at is the unlocking of human potential in a bunch of ways that can't just be expressed through like a distinct separation of action. The AI is doing this and the human's doing this, but also not just looking at the effects on a 2D model. Andy, does that match with what you were talking about?
Yes, and there is a term in artificial intelligence called, a phrase I should say, which is society of mind. And so advanced thinkers in AI many decades ago, and I don't know who it was, but you can do a quick search on society of mind and you'll see who came forward with this idea. But it's the idea that experts mixed with artificial intelligence but that's the human, not just in the loop as a supervisor, but as a contributor to the refinement of whatever problem is being pursued by the collective. That is the ideal form of collective intelligence, society of mind. And so this is what you're getting to, Beth, is that, and really what you were saying, Brian, which is experts and their contribution to what it is that's being produced by a collaboration between artificial intelligence and humans involved in that process. And we experience this, I think, naturally, in that, you know, a non-expert prompter of an AI is not going to get as much out of an AI as somebody who has had a lot of experience in conversation with AI. And it could be distinct to the models that you're using. So, you know, I use Claude periodically. I actually turned to Claude yesterday to just get a graphic of a Pareto optimal, you know, front for this kind of thing. I can share that with you in a minute if you guys are interested. But Claude is something that is really conversational and also has this incredible new feature on the right, which is a media presentation that's being delivered in graphics as a result of the code that the AI is generating to deliver a visualization to you. So that really makes me smarter because, and by the way, the example I can show you is that the AI wasn't very smart off the bat. It required my corrections to that AI and conversational in sort of enhancement to get to the right result. So I want to end there because I think I answered your question, Beth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing that I think we're talking about, or the next jump that I go to in terms of society of mind, is, again, it's not necessarily just one AI, right? So my corollary to what Andy was talking about was writing some code with Claude, and Claude couldn't see where its code was wrong. But if I move it into Gemini, having the exact same conversation, right? Like, I have this code, what's up with it? Gemini now can see it because it's not a part of Gemini's like context history in deciding that that was the most appropriate next predictive, right? Just the next predictive token thing. That probably could have happened if I just started a new conversation with Claude as well. But how do we quantify that in this 80-20 principle, right? So we're moving, I mean, we're obviously moving beyond the 80-20 principle, but the society of mind that Andy's talking about is can be the society of mind between the human and the AI, and it can be all the same Claude flavor of AI in multiple iterations, but it can also be expanding your AI society to take advantage of what each flavor of model is really good at. That's what I'm thinking. Junmi, does that match? I see you nodding.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, is having using those multiple AI for their specific I guess expertise or what they're built for. And that kind of goes back to mentioning Sakana's evolutionary merge, because that's kind of what people are trying to do with that method. Now, I wanted to propose a question, because we've been talking about the importance of expertise and having human experts, you know, within the conversation and working with AI. With the advancement of AI going so quickly, and we're talking about a lot of references is done as AI is as smart as a high schooler. AI is smart as a PhD. What does it mean to be an expert now? Now, creatively, like Brian had mentioned, and so creatively, humans can enhance their human qualities and what it makes a human be a human, and those kinds of things, and that can be enhanced because they can spend more time and effort doing that. Absolutely. But when it comes to a lot of our current world, our modern world, and having that expertise in whatever field, what defines that now, right? If all the AI are PhD doctorates in levels of intelligence, what does the human bring to that in their expertise, or how is expertise now defined, because humans are bringing that part of to the equation.
Yeah, and I want to sort of bring in that level of expertise because Jen, who has always been a super supporter of ours, I want to bring up two of her comments. And by the way, thank you to everybody else that's in the comment section. Rainy Equinox, Jen. I see some other folks in here. Justin is in here as well. Thank you guys. Jen had said at first, unrelated, happy Pumpkin Spice Day, returns to Starbucks Day to all who celebrate. I'm an Apple girly, but pumpkin spice has a cult following. Yes, it does. I am not an actual coffee drinker, but God knows I am fully aware through social, interactions when pumpkin spice hits Starbucks and the fancy cups and stuff. I will say last night, I'm going to get to what I'm talking about with business here. I will say last night, I just had my first pumpkin craft beer. That's how I know it's the right time of year. Even though it's miserably hot here still in Tampa, I did have a bit of a pumpkin beer last night at one of my favorite watering holes, and it was good. Now, what I want to bring up is, because Jen was talking about Starbucks, let's use them as an example. So she was also saying, curious if AI will decenter capitalism or make it worse for workers. Quote, oh, AI can do 80% of your previous workload. Great. Now we can do the work of 6 people. You can do the work of 6 people instead. And so, Jen, what I wanted to bring up was like this idea of Starbucks. So yes, Starbucks as a business has a couple different paths they can take as a business model. One, Starbucks can decide to say, let's just assume a couple things. AI can now take orders and make the drinks. It's a Kumba hand, like we've seen the mixologist, the bartender, the robot bartender. And there's one version of Starbucks in the future where even if you walk inside, you're like, I'll have the pumpkin spice latte with a half pump of this and that, whatever people say. And I'm making a grande, whatever, low ice. And the computer's just like, yeah, I mean, great. And immediately it goes in the hands or, or whatever. And it's like, order up, right? We can see a future where a robot could potentially take that entire task, make it an assembly line, essentially, and you might get your drink less than 60 seconds later. Okay. Is that going to happen? I don't know. That's probably not going to be the business model. There's a lot of customer service that would be lost in that. Or what Starbucks might look at is a hybrid model where I think most businesses are going to go, which is to say, oh, we will implement these AI robotics. We will implement AI. We were just talking about that the other day when we were talking about drive-throughs, which, by the way, lots to talk about on that tomorrow. Pin in that for our 2-week recap show. But they could say, oh, you know what? Now we don't need humans to mix it in the mixer and pour the drink and then say, order for Brian, order, you know what I mean? Like that. Okay, we don't need that. So what does that mean? Well, Starbucks might decide, hey, this is a great opportunity for us to use the same amount of workforce to be experts and do truly personalized and customized things, because now they can. Now it's actually great for me to go in there and say, I do love the pumpkin spice latte, but whatever, these are my, conditions, whatever. And that person could say, yeah, I see what you're saying. Hey, just a quick question here. Cause now they have time, right? With the rest of the process has been sped up by AI, that 80% is being taken care of. So now I'm having this interaction with this expert mixologist, if you will. I'm sure the barista, an expert barista. And they're saying, hey, listen, I can see on your frequent visitor card here that comes up on my screen that you usually get the pumpkin spice when it comes in. Have you thought about this? And I go, oh, that's pretty interesting. No, I haven't. Yeah, I think you might actually like it. Could I interest you in maybe trying that a little bit? We can get a sample up real quick for you, whatever. Hey, yeah, that would be great. Thanks for thinking about me or whatever. Whatever the case is, now we're having a better human-human interaction. I actually am thinking better about Starbucks. And the reality is, if it's a good mixed coffee and it's to my standards, just like building a hamburger for McDonald's, if it's what I'm expecting at the end of the counter, do I care if a robot did it or not? No, me personally, I think I'm going to care more about that customer experience. It's going to make me want to come back to Starbucks and go, I enjoy talking to the baristas. I could care less what happens after that point, as long as I get my drink and it's not spilled and it's not thrown at me, So I don't know. You could use that model and use it anywhere, but what do you guys think? Because I think there's, lots of businesses are going to have those choices. Do we reduce workforce because now 4 people can do the work, with AI can do it? Do we keep the same amount of workforce, but say do more? Or do we make it some sort of hybrid where it's like, now that we have this AI, we can now provide even higher levels of expertise and customer satisfaction. And we're not going to fire anybody. We're just going to reuse them in a better way.
Well, I hope that's the result.
Me too.
I personally prefer the universal basic income and let me, sip my pumpkin spice lattes, out at the beach instead of having to stand there. And if I want to, I'll spend time as a sort of a greeter at a highly automated retail location. But I also want the flexibility to, apply myself to things that are more enriching personally.
Yes, the idea of Andy as the greeter as you walk in, like, can we find other stuff for you? Because
the AI will have trained me to be an expert in whatever it is I'm supposed to talk about. Hey,
I mean, there's a reason there's a greeter at Walmart. There's a reason that like these things still exist. And yes, look, we just talked about it. Like I said on the other show, there's a lot of places where humans now want less interaction, and it's the drive-through experience. It's the automated experience. It's the bring it out to my window experience. It's the take it to my house in a driving, Chick-fil-A vehicle experience or drone experience. Like there's places for all of this, but I agree with you, Andy. Like, yes, there's like, oh, I'd rather spend my time other places than standing in a line at Starbucks. But there's that fine line of like, well, am I going to Starbucks for the experience because the coffee's really good? Spoiler alert, Starbucks coffee is gross. Don't come at me. It's disgusting.
Well, I think that we're social animals, and I think that we have we're missing something in current society because we distanced ourselves and instead are, using screens as a simile, for human interaction. So I hope there is a future where there's a lot more interest and a lot more receptivity to, random interactions with other humans out there in the world. And I miss that. I'm no longer in a workspace where I had a community of people. This is my community. You guys are my community now. And we have a great platform here for doing that isn't dependent on common geography. But right in my Santa Cruz region here, I'm sure there are many, many people that I would enjoy interacting with if I had the free time. I have way too many responsibilities just to, produce the economic flow that's needed to support my own family. And I don't get that. But wouldn't it be wonderful to have, as the Greeks did, slaves, replace those slaves with, AI that allow us all the free time to pursue knowledge, pleasure, and virtue. Let's all go after that in the future. Hey, can I shift over to a different application of the Pareto Principle to AI? And to do that, I'm going to share this graph that I did last night. Let's see. Yeah, here it is. So I call this the value effort graph. So value is being increased on the y-axis here, and effort is proceeding over here to 100% effort over on the right. So this graph shows that, early addition of effort, that isn't the full length of it, gets to, a pretty nice foundation of value. And then it rapidly increases to the 80% level with just arriving at 20% of the cumulative effort put in there. Now I want to change and then you see this diminishing returns where to get that last 20% of value, you've got to spend 80% of your time and effort. So let's put an overlay on this, which is training and tuning AIs to be better at solving math problems. Okay, so right now, many of the models can perform on certain math benchmarks around the 80% mark. They score around 80%. We've made this investment that came very rapidly in the development of AI. So we've gotten the 80-20 rule working for us here. But that last bit, if we're going to get to AIs that are truly nearly faultless in their ability to output, no hallucinations, accurate, reasoning that results in 95, 98% scores on the benchmarks, that's taking the AI developers a long time to do that. And there's a lot of investment because that last 20% is very difficult to get. So that's another way of looking at Pareto as applied to AI.
So the thing that I'm thinking that for me bridges both of those is that even though we're talking about AI, we're still to a certain extent using a human scale measure, right? And that's not gonna work moving forward. Like that's also going to give us diminishing returns in the level of understanding that we have if we are still trying to conceive of things as it relates to a human, right? So
Yes. And go back to the Max Tegmark explosion in hours once
Right.
you have the AI now involved in solving that last 20%. It doesn't take it all that time. Why? Because it's so fast. And suddenly that curve, instead of flattening out with diminishing returns, goes exponential again.
Right.
When you use AI.
Right. And let's just imagine. So that's human to the power of 3. Does that mean anything to you? Right? Like, other than like, wow, a lot? Right? I mean, like there's a point at which this doesn't happen. And if we go back to the robot conversation that we had on Monday, Brian, you showed us a restaurant that was basically a one-person restaurant with some robot droid kind of stuff.
Yep,
And my main thought about and you were like, look, one person can do all of this. This is amazing. My main thought about that was like, no, people need a break. People need to pee, right? I mean, like there's stuff that people need in order to perform at their maximum, that if we're just looking at mapping the AI principle onto humans, or humans onto what AI can do, because now AI can do what the human did, we're missing a bunch of humanity in that.
I want to push back because I feel like Amazon already solved this with peeing in, Gatorade bottles and stuff while they're out on the path. So is this really a problem, or can you just pee in the Gatorade bottle?
Girl.
Yeah.
Hello.
I don't know how they're doing it, Beth. There's women drivers for Amazon. No, obviously, I see what you're saying. Obviously, I'm joking. Clearly, I'm joking. God, I hope you know that.
And we know there are things. That's not what we're talking about. Don't come at us with the things. Please.
Yeah, right. We're joking. I see what you're saying, Beth. Obviously, yes, people need a break. People, is a one person. The old school. What makes me think of it is the old school photo development booths. Remember, they used to be out in the parking lots of your like local Big Star or whatever, and it was like almost literally the size of somebody like fitting inside, and they would, I don't think they were obviously weren't doing the photo development there. They were taking it in, it was going off, it was coming back to that little booth, and you would come pick it back up. At least that's how I remember it. And those were like one person businesses in the middle of a parking lot. There certainly wasn't any bathroom in there. You had to just literally shut down the little, stanchion, or kiosk, I guess it would be, and run into one of the local stores or something like that. So yeah. And obviously, by the way, just to wrap this up, like, I also know that, oh, isn't this great? It's like, look at Cali Express. Well, if we had a whole bunch of those, people wouldn't have to do that. And to a certain extent, we don't want people doing dangerous jobs, like maybe working the fryer, but also there needs to be entry level jobs for teenagers and things like that. And how does that affect our society? Of course, that's a whole other conversation to have, is like, is it such a good thing if AI, and is it going to naturally replace it with other entry level jobs for teenagers, or are they going to kind of be stuck without a way to make, minimum wage just to get their foot in the door, pre-college, whatever, pre-trade school, or whatever they might be doing, or pre-workforce, right? So there's a lot there. And by the way, I will circle back tomorrow, so I'm not going to talk anymore about the drive-thrus and stuff, because like, as sometimes happens, is why we have the 2-week recap show. I saw 3 great things immediately after that show, and I was like, whoa. Like, it was just showing up on my YouTube TV. It's like, how about this? I was like, that would have been great to know about. So I'll bring those up tomorrow. They're sort of AI based or whatever. But let's wrap up today. Like I said, tomorrow we're going to be talking about It's our 2-week recap show. So we'll be talking about all the topics, maybe this one, other ones, drive-throughs, AI, all that good stuff. It's really always a fun show. I highly recommend you guys coming back because I don't know what everybody else is going to bring to the conversation. That's sort of what makes it fun. So that'll be tomorrow. Next week, we have a slew of shows that we are just putting the final touches on, but there's a lot of good stuff in there, from fine tuning models to talking about GPT actions. And it's going to be a good week next week, as always. So make sure you guys are coming back. Don't forget, you can go to thedailyishow.com. If you want to look at any of our past episodes, that's a great place to do it. If you want to reach out to us because you have questions, concerns, or you're interested in perhaps getting consulting advice or working with our team, you can do that as well. And of course, as we always mention, you can sign up for the free newsletter that goes out every Sunday. And as I said before, I really love I really feel like 10, 11, issues we're honing in. I really love this last one. I wish I could send it to everybody, but you know what? Go ahead and sign up and you'll get the one that comes out this Sunday. I feel like it's value added because I'm able to use AI to help me with compiling 80% of the work so that we can sit and be experts and give you guys the really deep dive, good stuff in that newsletter by using AI to not make us do all the mundane, repetitive tasks. So there you go. There's my 80-20 to wrap everything up. All right. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Until then, have a great Thursday and we'll see you.
Aloha.